Beamy Alice landed a manager role at a corporate marketing firm about a year back. It wasn't a top-tier place, but it was respectable, good enough to make a real difference. My predecessor was an old-school guy who probably thought diversity was having both coffee and tea in the break room. The whole department had this stale, dusty energy. A real boys' club vibe, but the quiet kind. The kind where men just naturally assume their voices are more important. I walked in on my first day ready to change things. My mission was to build a truly progressive, inclusive, and forward-thinking team. A safe space where female creativity could finally flourish without being shut down by male ego. First order of business: meetings. I implemented a new structure. Women would be given the floor first to present ideas. Men could speak afterwards to add support or ask clarifying questions. No more interrupting. No more dominating the conversation. Some of the guys looked a bit confused, but they went along with it. They knew a new sheriff was in town. The women seemed relieved. I could see the gratitude in their eyes. Finally, someone was on their side. The team was a mix of people. A few older guys who were probably counting the days to retirement, a couple of younger, eager guys who were easy enough to mold, and several women, all competent. But I could tell they'd been conditioned to stay in the background. One of them was Marie. Sharp, capable, but quiet. A classic case of a talented woman being overlooked. I decided early on that I was going to champion her. She was going to be my success story. Then there was Joshua. He was the department's lead graphic designer. Been there for years, apparently. From the moment I met him, something felt off. He was quiet. Not shy quiet, but watchful quiet. He sat in the corner of the office, headphones on most of the day, just churning out work. And the work was good. Annoyingly good. Technically perfect, clean, always on time. But it was the way he operated that set off all my alarms. He never participated in office chatter, never joined for after-work drinks, never expressed a strong opinion on anything. This wasn't humility. This was a fortress. It was a classic display of passive-aggressive, toxic masculinity, the kind that refuses to engage because it believes it's above everyone else. He was an island, and his silence was deafening. It was a subtle, constant rejection of the new, collaborative culture I was trying to build. I tried to bring him into the fold during my first few weeks. In a team meeting, I asked him directly, "Joshua, what are your thoughts on how we can make our design process more inclusive?" He just looked up, blinked slowly, and said, "My process is to deliver the best possible product based on the brief provided by the client." The whole room was silent. It was such a sterile, dismissive answer. He was completely sidestepping the point. I told him that inclusivity was about more than just the final product. It was about the journey. He just nodded. "I understand." But he didn't. That was the problem. He was an artifact of the old ways, a ghost in the machine. The other guys would at least try to play along. They'd nod and use the right buzzwords. They learned fast. Joshua didn't. He just did his job with this infuriating, quiet competence. A few months into my tenure, a huge project came in. A total rebrand for a major client. It was a big deal. High stakes, high visibility. The core of the project fell on design, which meant it fell on Joshua. I managed the project, of course. I coordinated everything. I interfaced with the client. I tried to get Marie involved in the creative direction, but the client was specific about wanting the style that was clearly Joshua's signature. For weeks, he was a machine. He worked late. He anticipated problems before they happened. He turned complex client feedback into brilliant design solutions overnight. I had to admit, the guy was a workhorse. But I saw it for what it was, a massive ego trip, a way for him to prove that he, the lone male genius, didn't need a team. He didn't need my new culture. He just needed his computer. The final presentation to the client was a massive success. They were ecstatic. They praised the new branding up and down, calling it visionary. My boss, the director of the company, was on the call. He was thrilled. After the client signed off, we had a company-wide meeting to celebrate the win. This was my chance. I stood up in front of everyone. I talked about the hard work, the long hours, the collaborative spirit. Then I said, I especially want to give a massive shout-out to Marie, who really stepped up and led the creative vision on this project. Her leadership was instrumental. I smiled at Marie. She looked like a deer in the headlights. Her face went pale. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. They knew who did the work. I glanced over at Joshua. I was expecting a reaction, a flash of anger, a bitter frown. Anything. Nothing. He was just sitting there, looking at me with a completely neutral expression. He gave a small, polite nod, almost imperceptible. It was the most unnerving thing I'd ever seen. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He was just nothing. This confirmed my darkest suspicions. He was a sociopath. He felt nothing. He was playing a long game, and his refusal to show emotion was his power move. My attempt to lift up a deserving woman had just bounced right off his wall of masculine indifference. After that meeting, my resolve hardened. This man was a threat to everything I was trying to build. He had to be managed. My strategy shifted from trying to include him to actively containing him. His influence, his quiet authority born from sheer competence, had to be dismantled. The first step was to publicly challenge his perfection. A few weeks later, during a routine design review for a smaller campaign, I found my opportunity. He had submitted 3 mock-ups. 2 were perfect. The third had a tiny alignment issue in the footer text. It was the kind of thing that would be caught and fixed in a final check, a non-issue. In our team meeting, I projected that specific mock-up on the big screen for everyone to see. I didn't say his name at first. I just said, "Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this picture?" People squinted. No one said anything. I zoomed in on the footer. "Right here," I said, pointing with the laser. "This shows a lack of attention to detail. This is what happens when we work in silos and don't value peer review." I looked directly at Joshua. This kind of oversight can damage client trust. It suggests arrogance, a belief that our work doesn't need a second pair of eyes. The air in the room got thick and heavy. Marie was staring at her notepad, refusing to look up. Joshua just looked at the screen, then at me. He said, "You're right. My mistake. I'll have it corrected in 5 minutes." No defensiveness, no excuses. Just a calm, simple statement. He was doing it again. He was absorbing my criticism and making it powerless. He was refusing to give me the emotional reaction I needed to prove my point. An angry outburst would have been perfect. I could have documented it as difficulty accepting feedback or hostile reaction to female authority. Instead, I got nothing. Just cold, robotic compliance. It was maddening. I felt like I was punching a ghost. The next phase of my plan was to build up Marie as a credible alternative. I started assigning her to projects that would normally go to Joshua. Small things at first, then gradually more important ones. Of course, she didn't have his technical skill or speed. Her initial drafts often needed significant rework. And who did she go to for help? Joshua. I saw them from my office. She'd quietly walk over to his desk, and he would patiently walk her through a problem, showing her shortcuts in the software or explaining a design principle. He wasn't just giving her the answer, he was teaching her. This was his new strategy. He was trying to make her dependent on him. A classic mansplaining power play. He was pretending to help while actually reinforcing his own superiority. I had to put a stop to it. I called Marie into my office for one of our regular mentorship sessions. I told her how proud I was of her growth. I said she was becoming a real leader. Then I gently brought up Joshua. I told her, I've noticed you asking Joshua for help. While collaboration is great, you need to be careful. It's important for you to develop your own problem-solving skills without relying on him. I framed it as concern for her career. Sometimes, I explained, men in senior roles will use helping as a way to keep women in a junior position. They get an ego boost from being the expert. You're too talented to be someone's sidekick. Marie looked conflicted. She said he was actually a very good teacher. I told her that was the most dangerous part. He was making her feel like she needed him. I want you to try something, I said. For the next month, if you have a problem, come to me first. We'll work through it together. Let's show everyone you don't need a crutch. She reluctantly agreed. The result was a disaster. Her productivity plummeted. Projects got bottlenecked. I was spending half my day trying to solve technical design problems that were way over my head, usually ending with me secretly Googling tutorials. I was creating more work for myself, but it was a necessary sacrifice. I was breaking their bond. I was liberating her. Throughout all this, Joshua remained the same. He never complained about his reduced workload. He just took the smaller, less interesting projects I gave him and executed them perfectly. He never asked why he was being sidelined. He never showed any resentment. He just came in, did his work, and left. His professionalism was a weapon. It was a silent protest. It was an accusation. Every perfectly completed minor task he handed in felt like a judgment on my management. The tension was escalating, even if I was the only one who seemed to feel it. I started documenting everything. I created a private file on him. Refuses to integrate with team culture. Displays a pattern of uncommunicative and non-collaborative behavior. Subtly undermines the authority of female leadership through passive resistance. The file grew. It was all subjective, of course. I had no hard evidence, no emails with angry words, no missed deadlines, no public outbursts. All I had was his silence. But I knew what it meant. The breaking point came about 6 months after I started. The director called me into his office. He had a report from HR, an anonymous one. A complaint had been filed about department morale. It mentioned a climate of favoritism and unclear project ownership. It didn't name me. It didn't name Joshua. But I knew. It was him. He hadn't been silent at all. He had been plotting. He had gone behind my back to HR. This was the escalation I'd been waiting for. He had finally made a move. The director told me to keep an eye on things and make sure the team felt supported. He was a typical non-confrontational corporate type. I left his office with a cold fire in my stomach. The gloves were off. If he wanted to play dirty, I would show him how the game was played. I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. No more subtlety, no more managing from a distance. I needed to get him into a room and force him to show his true colors. I needed a reaction I could document. I sent him a meeting invitation for the end of the day. Subject: performance review and future expectations. Just the two of us. He accepted it within minutes. No questions asked. He walked into my office right on time and sat down. He didn't look nervous. He looked like he was there to discuss the weather. I closed the door. I started by laying out my vision for the department: collaboration, communication, mutual support. Then I told him he was failing on all fronts. I used all the keywords from my secret file. I told him his passive attitude was creating a drag on the team's energy. I said his refusal to participate in the new culture was being interpreted as hostility. I accused him of being a lone wolf in a team-oriented environment. I laid it on thick, watching his face for any crack in the facade. Nothing. He just sat there, hands resting on his knees, listening patiently. I got more direct. I feel like you are actively trying to undermine my authority. He blinked. Why would you think that? His voice was calm, even. Your silence, I shot back. It's a form of protest. You disapprove of my changes, and instead of voicing your concerns like an adult, you hide behind your work and your headphones. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have never been given any negative feedback on my work. I complete all my assigned tasks on time. I have helped every colleague who has asked for my assistance. My only goal here is to do my job to the best of my ability. It was the perfect corporate drone answer, an answer designed to be recorded. It was a shield. I realized I was getting nowhere. I had to up the stakes. I leaned forward and lowered my voice. Let me be very clear, Joshua. Your performance is not the issue. Your attitude is, and I am putting you on notice. I am strongly considering placing you on a formal performance improvement plan. A PIP, the corporate kiss of death. It was a direct threat to his career. This had to get a reaction, a flicker of fear, a flash of anger, something. He met my gaze. His expression was completely unreadable. He held the eye contact for a few seconds. Then he said, with no emotion in his voice at all, I understand. Just that. 2 words. He didn't ask what he could do to improve. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just accepted it. I was stunned. It was the most masterful display of passive aggression I had ever witnessed. He was daring me to do it. He was treating my ultimate threat like it was nothing. I dismissed him, my mind racing. He had won this round. But the war wasn't over. As he walked out of my office, I felt a genuine chill. I wasn't just dealing with a difficult employee. I was dealing with someone cold, calculating, and far more intelligent than I had given him credit for. That night, I decided I was done playing games. I would build a case to get him fired. It would be difficult without a paper trail of actual mistakes, but I would do it. I would document every interaction, every perceived slight, every moment of non-compliance. I would turn his silence into a weapon against him. I had no idea that he had just had the exact same thought. The day after I threatened him with the PIP, something changed. It wasn't obvious, but I noticed it immediately. I notice everything. He started bringing a new pen to our meetings. It sounds stupid, I know, but it was this sleek, black, slightly thicker than normal pen. He'd click it once when the meeting started, and once when it ended. He'd place it perfectly parallel to his notepad. It was a new variable, a change in the routine. And people like him, creatures of rigid habit, don't change things for no reason. My first thought was that it was some kind of nervous tic, a new way to channel his anxiety. But he wasn't anxious. He was never anxious. That was the whole problem. My second thought was that it was a message, a symbol. He was making a point in his own pathetic, silent way. I decided to ignore it. It was a distraction, a meaningless detail designed to get in my head. I was focused on the real mission, building my case. I needed a tangible failure, something I could point to that wasn't just a bad attitude. So I gave him a task that was designed to be impossible. We had a client who was notoriously difficult, always changing their mind. They needed a small set of web banners. I gave Joshua the brief, but left out a key piece of information I had from a private call with the client. They hated the color green. Hated it. The company's logo, which had to be included, was a mix of blue and green. It was a trap. I told him, the client wants something that feels fresh, organic, and vibrant. I trust your judgment. He took the brief and nodded. The pen was on the table between us. A day later, he sent me the mock-ups. They were brilliant, and they were almost entirely blue and gray, with only the tiniest legally required speck of green in the logo. He had used a clever gradient that made the blue so dominant, the green was practically invisible. He had somehow anticipated the trap and disarmed it. I called him into my office. The pen was there, click. I asked him, why did you avoid using green when the brief was all about fresh and organic? He looked at me calmly. I reviewed their past marketing materials and their public brand guidelines. They have a documented institutional preference for blue palettes and have not used green as a primary color in any campaign for the last 5 years. I prioritize their established brand identity over abstract keywords in a brief. He had done his homework. He had outmaneuvered me with pure, infuriating competence. I felt a surge of hot anger. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. That's not what I asked you to do. I asked you to follow the brief. This is another example of you thinking you know better than everyone else. This is the exact kind of male arrogance I'm talking about. He didn't react. He just sat there. The pen sat there with him. I continued. You know, this is why women struggle in the workplace. We get undermined by men who refuse to listen, who think their way is the only way. You're not just being a difficult employee, Joshua. You're being an obstacle to progress. It was a beautiful speech. It was the kind of thing they should print on posters. His response? I will make a version with green. When do you need it? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at his perfectly placid face. Don't bother, I snapped. I'll have Marie fix it. She knows how to listen. He just nodded. Then he reached for his pen. Click. Meeting over. He left my office, and I sat there shaking with frustration. He was untouchable. Every move I made he countered with logic and professionalism. He was turning me into the unreasonable one. He was making me the monster. It was then that I noticed he wasn't just bringing the pen to our one-on-ones. It was there in team meetings. It sat on his desk if I stopped by to talk to him. It was always there, watching. My paranoia started to grow. What was that pen? Was it just a pen? I Googled spy pens. The results made my stomach clench. Tiny cameras, audio recorders. Was he? No, he couldn't be. That was insane. It was illegal. But the more I thought about it, the more it made a terrifying kind of sense. It would explain his calmness, his refusal to get angry. He wasn't just being passive-aggressive. He was performing. He was creating a record of a calm, reasonable employee being harassed by his unhinged boss. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I felt violated, spied on. My office, my sanctuary, had been bugged. For a moment, I was scared. But then the fear turned into something else. Righteous fury. How dare he? How dare this mediocre, silent man turn my own office against me? This changed everything. This wasn't just about getting him fired anymore. This was about destroying him. If he was collecting evidence, then I would give him the grand finale he was looking for. I let a week go by. I was cordial. I was professional. I let him think he was safe. Then I scheduled the final meeting. I invited him to my office, and this time I also invited the head of HR, a woman I'd gotten along with quite well who was very receptive to my diversity and inclusion initiatives. The trap was set. My word against his. And who were they going to believe? The dynamic, forward-thinking female manager or the weird, silent guy who spies on his boss? The day of the meeting arrived. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. It was the calm of knowing you are about to win. Joshua walked in first. He sat down in the same chair as always. He placed the pen on the table. Good, I thought. Let him record this. Let him record his own execution. The HR manager arrived a minute later. She was a pleasant, by-the-book person. She smiled at both of us. So, Alice, she said, what's this about? I took a deep breath. The performance began. I laid out my case, piece by piece. I spoke about my vision for a collaborative, open, and safe work environment. Then I described Joshua's behavior as a direct and sustained assault on that vision. I used my documented notes. On numerous occasions, Joshua has refused to participate in team-building exercises, creating an atmosphere of exclusion. He has consistently resisted new, more collaborative workflows, choosing to work in a silo which bottlenecks projects. When given constructive feedback, his response is consistently dismissive and non-receptive, indicating an unwillingness to grow or adapt to company culture. I painted a picture of a man who was not just a poor employee, but a toxic presence holding the entire team back, a relic of an old guard mentality that had no place in the modern workplace. I explained that I had tried everything: mentorship, direct feedback. I had given him every opportunity to change. I even spun the PIP threat as a last-ditch effort to save him. I warned him that his behavior was leading down a path that could jeopardize his career here, I said, looking at the HR manager with feigned sadness. But nothing changed. I went on for nearly 20 minutes. It was the performance of a lifetime. I was reasonable, concerned, and regretful. Through it all, Joshua sat perfectly still. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even flinch. He just watched me. When I was finished, I leaned back in my chair. So, with great regret, I concluded, I have to recommend the termination of his employment, effective immediately. He is simply not a fit for the culture we are trying to build. The HR manager looked sympathetic. She nodded slowly. She made some notes on her pad. Then she turned to Joshua. "Well, Joshua," she said, her tone gentle, "do you have anything to say in response to this?" The whole room was silent. This was it, the final moment. Joshua did not look at me. He looked directly at the HR manager. He said, "Yes, I do." His voice was exactly the same as always, calm, measured, flat. "Everything Alice just said is a subjective interpretation of events," he began, "and it's a narrative she has been constructing for months, a narrative that is completely contradicted by the factual record." The HR manager frowned slightly. "What factual record are you referring to?" Joshua slowly reached forward and picked up the pen from the table. "This," he said, holding it up. "This is not just a pen. It is a digital audio recorder. And for the past 3 months, ever since the day Alice threatened my career in a private meeting with no witnesses, I have been recording every single professional interaction I have had with her." The blood drained from my face. The air left my lungs. It was real. The HR manager's eyes widened. "You've been recording her?" "To protect myself," Joshua said, his voice unwavering, "to create the factual record that I knew I would need. A record to protect my career from a manager who openly stated her intention to target me based on my perceived attitude and my gender." I found my voice. It was a strangled whisper. "That's illegal. You can't record me without my consent." Joshua turned his head and looked at me for the first time. The emptiness in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something that looked like cold, hard pity. "You should check the state laws," he said. "In this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording," and I consented. He turned back to the HR manager, who now looked like she had seen a ghost. "I have over 14 hours of audio," Joshua continued. "Audio of Alice telling me that male arrogance is the reason she's critiquing my work. Audio of her stating that men on the team need to step back and take on support roles, while she gives lead roles to women, regardless of experience." He paused. "I have a recording of her telling me, and I quote, 'You know, Joshua, such as you, this is the anchor that pulls the whole society back. You're just afraid of strong women.' That was from our meeting 2 weeks ago. And I have the full, unedited recording of the meeting where she falsely attributed my work on the rebrand project to Marie in front of the entire company." He placed the pen gently on the table. "The audio files are all dated, time-stamped, and saved on a cloud server. I can email you the link right now. You can listen for yourself. You can hear the difference between her official story and what she actually says when she thinks no one is listening." No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. I was frozen. My mind was a blank wall of white noise. This wasn't happening. The HR manager looked from the pen to my face, then back to the pen. The professional, friendly mask had evaporated. Her face was a mixture of horror and pure, unadulterated legal panic. She stammered, I think we need to pause this meeting. Joshua nodded. I agree. I will send you that link. I expect you and the company's legal counsel to review it thoroughly before we have any further discussions about my employment. He stood up. He picked up his notepad and his pen. He looked at the HR manager and said, "Thank you for your time." He didn't even look at me. It was as if I no longer existed. Then he walked out of the room and closed the door behind him. I was left alone with the HR manager. She was staring at the spot on the table where the pen had been. She wouldn't look at me. "Alice," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" The next 48 hours were a blur. I was told to go home, to not contact anyone from the office. My work email and Slack were deactivated remotely. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying every conversation, every word. I had been so sure of myself, so certain I was on the right side of history. He had used my own words, my own progressive ideology, as a weapon against me. He had turned my crusade for justice into a case for workplace discrimination. The call came 2 days later. It was the director. His voice was cold, stripped of all its usual corporate pleasantries. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He said their lawyers had reviewed the audio. He said my actions had exposed the company to significant legal and financial liability. He gave me 2 options. Option 1, the company fires me for cause, for gross misconduct. They fight my unemployment claim, and they provide no severance. And, he added, they would not stand in the way if Joshua decided to pursue a personal lawsuit against me. Option 2, I resign, effective immediately. I sign a non-disclosure agreement. In return, they give me 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference. And they handle the Joshua situation internally. He gave me 10 minutes to decide. There was no choice. I had been completely and totally defeated. I took the deal. I typed up my resignation letter with shaking hands and emailed it to him. The next day, I had to go back to the office to collect my personal belongings. They made me come after hours, so no one else would be there. As I was packing my sad little box of desk plants and coffee mugs, I saw him. Joshua was still at his desk, working late under the glow of his monitor. The director was standing next to him, looking over his shoulder at the screen. They were talking quietly, and the director laughed at something Joshua said. Then he patted him on the shoulder, a gesture of respect, of camaraderie. He was no longer the quiet guy in the corner. He was the man who had slain the dragon. I slipped out a side door. I didn't want him to see me. I never saw any of them again. I lost my career, my reputation, my self-respect. And he did it all without ever raising his voice. He just listened. And he pressed record.